The Dating Game Killer by Hollywood and Crime contains depictions of violence and is not suitable for everyone. Please be advised.
It was just before 5 in the afternoon on June 20th, 1979, and Robin Samso's ballet teacher was getting worried. The 12-year-old still hadn't shown up for her first day of work answering phones at the small studio. Now class was about to start. The instructor got word to Robin's mother, Marianne Frazier, at work. Marianne immediately called her daughter's friend Bridget, since the two girls had planned to spend time together that day at Sunset Beach. Bridget told her Robin had borrowed her bike a little after 3 o'clock to ride to the ballet studio in nearby Seacliff Village. Marianne began contacting Robin's friends, but no one had any idea where she might be. It was out of character for Robin to simply take off without telling her. Robin had never run away, didn't use drugs, and was remarkably responsible for a child her age. Now Marianne drove home and talked to Robin's siblings. No one had seen Robin all afternoon. Her brother and sister went off to scour the neighborhood on foot, while Marianne drove the route Robin would have taken to the ballet school. By early evening, with no sign of her daughter, she was growing frantic. It was time to call the police. Thanks to Best Fiends, our presenting sponsor. Living in the world today is stressful. It seems like there's always something new to worry about. The next time you're feeling overwhelmed, escape into the colorful world of Best Fiends, the 5-star rated mobile puzzle game. It's easy to get the hang of, and with thousands of levels to play, it's hours of fun right at your fingertips. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. From Wondery, this is Hollywood and Crime. I'm Tracy Patton with Stephen Lang. If you're joining us for the first time, we recommend going back to listen to the previous episodes. We'll be waiting for you. This is episode 4 of The Dating Game Killer, Mile Marker 11.
It's late afternoon as Forestry Service firefighter Dana Krappa drives along the Santa Anita Canyon Road that snakes through the Angeles National Forest. June 20th is the first day of her 5-day shift at the Chantry Flats Firehouse, and she's looking forward to it. At 20, she's one of the younger firefighters and one of very few females. The training is rigorous but rewarding, and there's no predicting what any shift will bring. Long, slow days spent clearing away dry brush, or intense hours on the fire line as flames edge toward inhabited areas. But every time she makes the scenic mountain drive, it's with a sense of anticipation and pride. As Krappa approaches mile marker 11, she notices a car parked at a turnout. She might have passed it without a second thought, but it's a 76 Datsun F10 station wagon, just like the one she owns. She doesn't see many of those around. As she passes the turnout, she notices 2 people walking away from the parked car, a tall man with dark curly hair and a little blonde girl. He appears to be leading her as they head down an embankment toward a dry stream bed. The man glances over at Krappa as she drives by. She looks back at the road, not wanting to appear nosy, but something about the scene just doesn't look right. She couldn't say the man was forcing the girl exactly, but she was walking stiffly, as if she didn't want to be there. Then again, they might be father and daughter. Krappa decides it's none of her business and concentrates on her driving. She needs to gather herself for the coming work week. There's no way of knowing what the next 5 days will bring. She puts the man and girl out of her mind and heads up the mountain as the sky darkens with approaching dusk.
By the morning after Robin Samso's disappearance, the Huntington Beach Police Department was conducting an active missing persons investigation. It was the first apparent child abduction that had occurred in the small beach community. Given Robin's age, Detective Craig Robeson of the Juvenile Division would be in charge of the investigation. Tall and imposing, Robeson had recently made detective after 8 years on the force. He was also a law school graduate with a keen eye for detail. He immediately assigned patrolmen to search the neighborhood for the yellow Schwinn bike Robin had been riding when she'd vanished. Then, after familiarizing himself with the police report, Robeson came up with a plan of action. First, he needed to eliminate the obvious possibilities. Had Robin been having problems with her family or friends? Were child custody issues in play? Nothing in Robin's history led the detective to believe she might be a runaway. And though her parents were divorced, they were on friendly terms. Marianne insisted Robin's father would not have taken her. One person Robeson wanted to interview as soon as possible was Bridget Wilvert, the friend with whom Robin had spent the last few hours before going missing. When Bridget came in, she immediately got investigators' attention with her story about a man who approached the 2 girls on the beach and asked to take their pictures. That afternoon, sketch artist Marilyn Droz was called to the station house and began creating a composite of the unknown photography student. Marilyn was impressed with Bridget's composure and ability to recall details. Painstakingly and with frequent revisions based on the 12-year-old's corrections, a face began to emerge on the sketch pad. As soon as Bridget okayed the image, Marilyn brought it to Detective Robeson. With little else to go on, the Huntington Beach police considered the man in the picture a person of interest. The sketch was released to the press in hopes someone in the public would recognize it. The following day, articles appeared in the Los Angeles Times and Huntington Beach Daily Pilot. Local TV channels soon picked up the story and flyers were plastered throughout the beach community. The stories were accompanied by a photo of the pretty and poised Robin Samsoe, smiling confidently at the camera. Also shown was the composite of the photographer she and Bridget Wilvert had encountered the afternoon of her disappearance. He was described as in his 30s, about 6 feet tall. The face in the sketch had deep-set eyes and wide cheekbones. Most pronounced was the wild mane of dark curly hair that flowed down to his shoulders.
Change is in the air for Rodney Alcala. For years he's taken pride in his long, wavy tresses, but suddenly he decides it's time for a new look. He drives his Datsun station wagon to the drugstore and peruses the hair care aisle for straightening products. When he gets home, he heads for the bathroom. Carefully reading the instructions on the box, he washes his hair and applies the chemical agent. Within an hour, he blow-dries and combs out a head of long, straight hair. He looks at himself in the mirror, flicks his head left and right, watching the new locks settle onto his shoulders. Elizabeth Kelleher opens the door to a beaming Rodney Alcala. He strides in and spins around to show her his new look from every possible angle. They've only been dating for a few months, but at 22, Elizabeth knows love when she feels it. From the beginning, Rodney was polite and thoughtful. She marvels at the sharpness of his mind. He always seems to anticipate her needs. And she thinks he has real talent as a photographer. She never asks why so many of his pictures are of very young girls. She's not going to second-guess her artist boyfriend. "So what do you think?" he asks her, showing off his new head of perfectly straight hair. "Well, it might take a little getting used to," Elizabeth tells him. She always loved his dark curls. What made him decide to straighten it? He tells her he's been thinking about it for some time now. She shrugs it off and they go on their date. When they get together a few days later, he's altered his appearance yet again. His trademark long hair is gone, replaced by a short business-style cut. He grins at her and asks if she likes it. She finds the new look surprising, recalling how he loved to show off his locks by flipping his head to the side for maximum effect. But she smiles supportively and tells him she wouldn't care if he went bald. But his appearance isn't the only thing Rodney Alcala has altered. He's replaced the carpeting in the station wagon. When Elizabeth asks him about it, he tells her he spilled gasoline in the car and the smell was overwhelming. She can't remember any smell, but she doesn't press him on it. She's convinced Rodney is a talented photographer with a promising future. It's only a matter of time before the world sees in him what she does.
By late June, investigators with the Huntington Beach Police Department had followed up on hundreds of tips in the missing persons case of Robin Samsoe. Most were from well-intentioned citizens whose desire to help surpassed the reliability of their information. But occasionally a long shot would pan out, so investigators had to painstakingly sort through them all. When Donald Haynes called, officers were at first dubious about what he had to say. He acknowledged that he didn't know Robin, hadn't been anywhere near Huntington Beach the day she went missing, and the information he had concerned a case from more than a decade ago. He told investigators that in the fall of 1968, he'd been driving down Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood when he witnessed the abduction of 8-year-old Tally Shapiro. He'd followed the car and called the police. The man escaped, but was later apprehended and served time in prison. As soon as Donald Haynes heard about Robin's disappearance, he thought the same man might be responsible. The detective took notes, thanked the caller, and hung up the phone. That afternoon, a call came in from a parole officer who said the man in the sketch reminded him of a parolee on his caseload. So did the M.O. Already labeled a sexual predator, the convict had been arrested in February for raping a 15-year-old girl. He was out on bail awaiting trial in September. When officers working the Samsoe case compared notes later in the day, they realized both tips concerned the same individual, Rodney Alcala. The Dating Game Killer is brought to you by Best Fiends. Every day, we're all plagued with constant notifications, from email to the news to reminders from our to-do list. There are lots of things to worry about, even more things to get done, and it feels like a roller coaster that never ends. Don't get overwhelmed. Get Best Fiends, the 5-star rated mobile puzzle game. When I'm strategically solving fun puzzles and collecting cute characters, there's not a lot of room for worry or anxiety. Truly, I can't tell you what a relief it is to turn off my brain while I'm playing Best Fiends. With thousands of levels and new monthly themed challenges being added all the time, this game is hours of fun right at your fingertips. You can even play offline, so it's fantastic for travel, on a plane, train, wherever you find yourself. Best Fiends is 5-star rated with over 100 million downloads. If you enjoy puzzles, Best Fiends is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends.
In the aftermath of a shocking crime, people always ask why. Who would do something like that? Was it about power, ego, revenge? What makes people like that tick? In Wondery's new podcast, Killer Psyche, retired FBI criminal profiler Candace DeLong dissects the thoughts and motivations of the most infamous felons in history. With a career spanning nearly 5 decades, she sat across the table from hundreds of criminals and spent countless hours inside their minds. In every episode of Killer Psyche, Candace will unravel the psychology and instincts of America's most complex and disturbing figures, including high-profile cases that she personally worked on, like the Unabomber, and other cases like Christopher Dunch, aka Dr. Death, where her training and experience can help us understand what was going on inside his head. Was he delusional or a cold-blooded killer? To hear the gripping details of the most chilling criminals' minds in modern history, follow Killer Psyche on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen to new episodes early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.
It's evening as Dana Crappa drives toward mile marker 11 on Santa Anita Canyon Road in the San Gabriel Mountains. For days, she kept thinking back to the odd scene she witnessed while driving to her shift at the fire station. The image of the man leading the young girl off into the woods was disconcerting, but she convinced herself the two were related. Then the following day, she saw the blue Datsun again parked along the same stretch of road. This time, the man was standing beside the car, but the girl was nowhere in sight. The front of his shirt was stained with what looked like dirt, as if he'd been scurrying through the underbrush. The car was covered in dust and debris, maybe from off-roading. She wondered if he'd been there all night, and if so, where was the little girl? Once again, Dana Crappa decided not to report it to anyone. What had she seen, after all, but a man and child on a mountain road? For several days she tried to put it out of her mind, but the images kept returning. Finally, she decided to drive back out to marker 11, near where the car had been parked. It's dark by the time she pulls over onto the shoulder and kills the engine. The Datsun is gone, the place deserted. She grabs her flashlight and gets out of the car. She isn't sure exactly what she's looking for. She only knows that she needs to set her mind at ease. Her shoes slipping in the soft dirt, she makes her way toward a dry stream bed. For a moment she feels silly, thinking she should turn around and go back to the barracks. But she continues along the ravine, casting the flashlight beam in a side-to-side arc in front of her. Occasionally she spots pieces of trash left by careless hikers, soda cans and fast food wrappers, cigarette butts and beer bottles. Then she stops, and the breath catches in her chest. She steadies the flashlight in her hand as a coldness rises up in her spine. She blinks hard, once, twice, as if somehow when she looks back it won't be there. She has no idea how long she stands there staring at the decomposing body before she finally breaks away. She half slips, half scurries up the ravine and back to the road. Somehow she's back in her car. She hears the jangling of her keys and realizes she's managed to get them in the ignition. The engine roars to life and the trees fly by as she drives frantically back to the firebase. When she reaches the barracks, she runs into the bathroom and splashes cold water over her face. She stares at herself in the mirror, watches her chest heaving with each gulp of air. Finally, her breathing returns to normal. She holds her head under the faucet and takes a long drink. She dries her face and hands. Then she goes to the rec room and falls into a chair, hugging her knees to her chest, as if folding in on herself. The TV is on, and several of the guys are arguing about sports. Dana Crappa doesn't tell anyone what she saw.
When Rodney Alcala's mugshot was faxed to the police station in Huntington Beach, Detective Art Droz was on duty. He immediately noticed the striking resemblance to the composite drawn by his wife, sketch artist Marilyn Droz. He looked forward to telling her how accurate her rendering had been and how it helped identify a potential suspect in Robin Samso's apparent abduction. Marilyn was out when he got home, so Art went to the living room and flicked on the television for background noise as he sat down to read the evening paper. Perusing the day's events, he paid little attention to what was on the TV screen, though he could tell by the cheers and applause it was a game show of some sort.
And this is your date, and I want to tell you something about him. Cheryl, he's a skydiver, so he's got a lot of nerve. He's into motorcycling. He's also a fine photographer. Say hello to Rodney Alcala. Rodney, come on, say hello.
Detective Droz stared in disbelief at the screen as a grinning Rodney Alcala strode out onto the stage to kiss the young woman who'd picked him for her date. Droz reached into his pocket for the composite his wife had drawn. He unfolded it and put it on the coffee table, looking back and forth between the TV and the sketch. No doubt about it, it was the same man. No one at the station was going to believe this. The following morning, Huntington Beach detectives contacted Chuck Barris Productions, who owned the dating game. They learned that the episode was a rebroadcast of a show that had originally aired in September of the previous year. An officer was dispatched to the Burbank production company to bring back a copy of the videotape.
On July 2nd, forest firefighter William Popke spots what appear to be bones lying in the dirt in the Chantry Flat section of the Angeles National Forest. At first, it doesn't arouse his interest. As a member of the spraying team assigned to the area, Popke regularly comes upon animal remains. The area is rich with wildlife, including deer, raccoons, coyotes, even the occasional cougar. In fact, he recalls noticing the bones several days ago, thinking they were the torso of a deer. He showed them to team member Dana Crappa at the time, and the young woman had grown pale and half stumbled back. Today he takes a closer look, and isn't so certain it's a deer. In fact, the bones look more like part of a human skeleton. Popke returns to his vehicle and calls his dispatcher, who notifies the Sierra Madre Police Department. Within an hour, officers arrive at the stretch of road near mile marker 11. Popke brings them to the skeleton, which they immediately recognize as partial human remains. Finding a dead body in the San Gabriel Mountains doesn't automatically trigger a murder investigation. The forest is frequented by drug users and addicts, runaways, and the homeless, even the occasional criminal evading the law. A death might be the result of foul play, but it was more likely an overdose or accident. Officers note that little flesh remains on the corpse, and several of the bones are missing, probably due to animal predation. The cause of death will have to await autopsy. They cordon off the area and wait for the medical examiner to remove the body. It isn't until the Monday following the 4th of July weekend that the medical examiner can look at the skeletal remains found near marker 11. He finds little soft tissue remaining, and portions of the hands and left foot are absent. The bones reveal no cut or fracture marks that might indicate the use of a weapon. Because of the condition of the remains, he reaches no conclusion on cause and manner of death, nor can he determine whether the victim was sexually assaulted. He notes that the body appears to be that of a young female, under 5 feet tall. Aware of the Samso disappearance, local authorities call the Huntington Beach Police Department. Lead investigator Craig Robeson immediately contacts Robin's dentist, who provides her records to the medical examiner. Before the end of the day, Robeson gets the news. The remains are those of the missing 12-year-old.
With confirmation that the body found at Chantry Flats was Robin Samso's, the missing persons case was now officially a murder investigation. Huntington Beach Police Detective Craig Robeson felt confident he was closing in on a suspect. Several witnesses had come forward to tell of encounters with the same mysterious photographer described by Bridget Wilvert. Teenagers Joanne Murchland and Tony Esparza reported that a man had approached them at the beach with the same story told by Bridget Wilvert. He was a photography student and wanted to enter their pictures in a contest. When he began asking personal questions, the girls were creeped out and quickly left. They were shown a photo lineup and identified the man as Rodney Alcala. Other beachgoers called in to report seeing an oddly attired man with a camera on the date of Robin's disappearance. All pointed to Alcala's mugshot. More damning was Alcala's criminal history. By now, investigators knew that in 1968 he had abducted and sexually assaulted 8-year-old Tally Shapiro. And in 1974, he'd violated parole by giving marijuana to a minor. Some digging revealed that the initial charges had been kidnapping and attempted rape. He had taken 13-year-old Julie Johnson to a remote cliffside and only been stopped by an alert park ranger. Detective Robeson was amazed at how many times the convicted sex offender and child predator had slipped through the judicial system. It was time to pay Rodney Alcala a visit. Undercover policemen were sent to the Monterey Park address where Alcala lived with his mother. The officers were given instructions to verify his location, then surveil the subject and gather information about his patterns and habits. That evening, they observed Alcala getting into a blue Datsun station wagon and driving toward the business district. The officers tailed him for a few minutes before losing him in traffic, but they had confirmed his whereabouts, and they knew the car he was driving. When you start looking into your options when it comes to home security, you realize one thing pretty quickly. The traditional way is a massive headache. Who wants to wait weeks for a technician to do a messy installation that costs a small fortune? But there is another way. Our sponsor, SimpliSafe. SimpliSafe is award-winning protection. This is truly comprehensive protection for your entire home. Outdoor cameras and doorbells alert you to anyone approaching your home. Entry, motion, and glass break sensors guard inside. You barely notice it's there. But what's truly remarkable is you can set up this system all by yourself. Anyone can do it. It took me 30 minutes to an hour tops. And just like that, you've got an army of highly trained security experts ready to dispatch police to your home at a moment's notice 24/7. And it's only 50 cents a day with no contracts. Go to simplysafe.com/datinggame and you'll get free shipping and a 60-day risk-free trial. Go now and be sure you go to simplysafe.com/datinggame so they know our show sent you. One more time. That's simplysafe.com/datinggame.
A different hairstyle and new carpeting in his car aren't the only changes in Rodney Alcala's life. On July 8th, he announces to Elizabeth that a change of locale is on the horizon as well. He tells his girlfriend that he's found backers in Dallas to open his own photography studio. This is just the opportunity he's been hoping for. He confesses he's been growing tired of LA anyway, and the change of scenery will do him good. Seeing her frown, he quickly adds that it might be good for both of them, if she's willing to join him. It's a lot for her to think about, she says, though she seems relieved that he's included her in his plans. She shares his excitement, fully supportive of his decision, and open to the idea of them starting a new life together in another city. Rodney tells her he'll be heading out in a few days on a scouting expedition. He assures Elizabeth he'll send for her as soon as he's settled. 3 days after telling his girlfriend about the photography shop in Dallas, Rodney Alcala is at the Safeguard mini storage in Seattle, Washington. The proprietor tells him he's in luck. There's only one unit left, and it's his if he wants it. Rodney rents it on the spot and takes the key. He immediately begins moving cartons from the trunk of his car and placing them in the closet-sized shed. When he's done, he buys 2 padlocks and secures the door. The only thing left to do now is find a motel. He'll need a good night's sleep before the long return drive in the morning. Back in L.A., Rodney tells Elizabeth that his trip to Dallas went well. So well, in fact, that he's finalizing plans to relocate there permanently. They decide to go out for a celebratory meal. Rodney goes on about his plans, regaling her with the cultural advantages of Dallas. Elizabeth joins in his enthusiasm. The expected departure date is July 24th. They are a young couple on the move, with every reason to believe that nothing will stand in their way.
While plainclothes detectives surveilled Rodney's house, lead detective Craig Robeson organized a search line near mile marker 11 to scour the dry riverbed where Robin Samso had been found. Standing only a few feet apart, officers combed the area looking for evidence. Compounding the difficulty was that the underbrush was littered with trash left by hikers or itinerants. Potential evidence needed to be sorted from random debris. But several patches of ground radiated the particular stench all too familiar to those working homicide. The searchers homed in on those areas where they knew human remains had decomposed. Within minutes, a girl's blue and yellow tennis shoe was found in the dirt. Upon inspection, it bore several names in a child's handwriting. Robin and Ralph, Karen and Jason, Wendy and Alan. Nearby, a clump of blonde hair was found matted with leaves and twigs. Other human remains included a 3-inch fragment of bone and a fingertip. Searchers also recovered a 12-inch cane-cut stainless steel knife, which bore traces of hair, blood, and apparent tissue. On the afternoon of July 11th, investigator Robeson went to Robin's Huntington Beach home for what he knew would be an impossibly sad chore. Marianne answered the door flush with grief, her eyes red and swollen. The detective needed to know if the tennis shoe found at Chantry Flats belonged to Robin. He described it, and Marianne's head dropped. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Yes," she said so softly he could barely hear her. "It's hers."
At 7 a.m. on July 24, officers from the Huntington Beach Police Department surround the small 3-bedroom house at 1370 Abajo Drive in Monterey Park. They're determined not to let their quarry escape, as he did following his attack on Tally Shapiro years before. Detective Robeson holds a warrant for the arrest of Rodney James Alcala on suspicion of the murder of Robin Samso. A separate warrant allows investigators to search the premises and Alcala's 1976 Datsun station wagon for any potential evidence in the case. Listed on the warrant are any photographic materials, including negatives and unprocessed film, that might bear images of Robin. Officers will also be collecting samples of blood, hair, and fibers that might be linked to the crime, as well as soil or vegetable matter indigenous to Chantry Flats. As soon as a perimeter is established, Robeson pounds on the front door, shouting that it's the police. In a few seconds, Alcala's mother opens the door, eyes wide. Robeson strides in, several officers flanking him. He holds the warrant up and asks where her son is. She seems bewildered, but points down a hall to a back bedroom. When the armed detectives burst in, they find Alcala asleep in bed. He opens his eyes groggily to find men towering over him. He seems more dazed from being abruptly awakened than surprised to have cops in his bedroom. Robeson informs him that he's being arrested for the murder of Robin Samso. He needs to get dressed and come with them. Alcala doesn't say anything, but complies without incident. He is handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. With his mother watching from the doorway, Alcala is driven off to be formally charged. For the next several hours, officers search the property and Alcala's car. In the house, they find boxes of photos, negatives, and slides, as well as cameras and photographic equipment. All are logged into evidence and labeled. Undeveloped film, as well as film still inside the cameras, will be processed and examined for any images of Robin. Also taken as potential evidence are a pair of handcuffs, several lengths of rope, a leather bullwhip, a pair of pink panties, and 8 copies of Young and Naked magazine. They impound a set of cane-cut knives similar to the one found at Chantry Flats, though the set appears complete. Inside Alcala's Datsun, investigators find a camera with a colorful strap, similar to the one described by witnesses at the beach on and around the day of Robin's disappearance. New shag carpeting appears to have been recently installed. While going through the house, one of the officers spots a receipt for a storage locker in Seattle, Washington. Since it isn't listed in the warrant and bears no obvious connection to the Samso case, he isn't permitted to take it into evidence. But nothing prevents him from grabbing his pen and pad and jotting down the details.
Detective Robeson knew that the arrest of Rodney Alcala concluded only one phase of the investigation. He was relieved that his suspect was safely behind bars, but the process of gathering evidence for a successful prosecution had just begun. Upon arrival at the Huntington Beach police station, Rodney Alcala was booked, and his bail set at $250,000. He protested his innocence and provided an alibi for the afternoon Robin had gone missing. He claimed he'd been at Knott's Berry Farm applying for a job as photographer for a disco contest. His story would have to be checked out. So too would the statement given by Alcala's sister, Chrissy de la Cerda, that her brother had spent June 19th babysitting for her. The date was significant. It was the day before Robin's disappearance, when witnesses had reported seeing a man matching Alcala's description photographing young girls at the beach. Defense would argue that if Alcala wasn't the mystery photographer on the 19th, he wasn't on the 20th either. It was a case of mistaken identity. Less helpful to Alcala was the fact that it was police practice to record all calls made to and from prisoners at their facility. Shortly after his arrival at the Huntington Beach jail, Alcala had a phone conversation with his sister in which he made several cryptic remarks about a storage locker he'd recently rented in Seattle. Detective Robeson already knew about it, but the exchange heightened his curiosity. Alcala had rented the unit only days before Robin's body had been discovered. A look in the phone book would show dozens of facilities in the greater Los Angeles area. What possessions of his were so important they needed to be stashed in a storage shed over 1,000 miles away? Robeson knew what his next step would be. He booked a flight for the following morning. By late afternoon on July 26th, Robeson and fellow Huntington Beach police detective Bill McErlane were standing in front of Shed E24 at Safeguard Mini Storage in Seattle. On the 3-hour flight from Los Angeles, the detectives had contemplated what they might find in the storage unit so hastily rented by their murder suspect. Robeson took out 2 padlock keys found inside a briefcase during the search of Alcala's home. The keys worked, and the detectives entered the 5x5 shed. Cardboard cartons were stacked in neat columns along one wall. Some were labeled on the side with magic marker. Over what remained of the afternoon and into the early evening, they searched for anything that might be pertinent to the Samso case. Much of it proved disappointing. Clothes or household items they might have found in any of the hundreds of units in the facility. But in one of the boxes, they discovered a small jewelry pouch. Knowing the predilection of some killers to keep trophies of their victims, the detectives glanced at each other, then opened it up. Inside were several pairs of women's earrings. One that caught their attention was a pair of small gold globes. Looking closely, there appeared to be tiny cut marks, as if they'd been altered. The detectives bagged and labeled the jewelry pouch and continued going through the shed. Hours into their search, they came upon a cache of boxes that both detectives knew immediately might be significant. Several contained photographs, negatives, and slides, well over 1,000. Even a cursory look showed virtually all were of women, many of them very young. Intriguingly, one carton was labeled Tally VA Rape. Another was given the more lyrical Ode to New York by John Berger. By now, the detectives knew that John Berger was an alias used by Alcala on several occasions. More significantly, Berger was considered a person of interest in the murder of Manhattan socialite Ellen Hover 2 years earlier. The young woman had disappeared shortly after meeting with him for a supposed photo shoot. Her skeletal remains had been found 4 months later in a wooded area of Westchester County. The photos would have to be gone over in detail once the officers returned to Huntington Beach. By the time Robeson and McErlane resecured the Seattle storage shed and got in their rented car, both were convinced the trip had been well worth it. But the sheer number of photographs increased the concerns already playing on the detectives' minds. There might be more victims than they were aware of. How many of the girls and young women in the photographs had met the same fate as Robin? They were beginning to think Rodney Alcala was a serial killer. Next time on The Dating Game Killer, with Rodney Alcala back in jail awaiting trial, his defense attorney works to keep his prior criminal record out of court. Police detectives deal with an unreliable witness whose story about what she saw near mile marker 11 keeps changing. And when the case goes to court, the mother of one of Alcala's victims takes the stand. This is episode 4 of 6 of The Dating Game Killer from Hollywood and Crime. If you like what you've been hearing, be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. The Dating Game Killer was written and directed by Larry Brand and produced by Rebecca Reynolds, Tracy Patton, and Jim Carpenter for Hollywood and Crime. Recorded by Julian Nicholson. Edited by Eric Cifuentes and Julian Nicholson. Designed by Eric Cifuentes and mixed by Mark Holden for the Invisible Studios, West Hollywood. Executive producers, Marshall Louis, Stephanie Jens, and Hernan Lopez.
Hey, I'm Mike Corey, the host of Wandery's show, Against the Odds. In our next season, I'm telling an amazing true story about American sailors who wrecked their ship off the coast of Africa in 1815. They're captured by a nomadic tribe. To escape, they will need to cross the largest hot desert in the world to reach civilization. They will battle against blistering heat, inhumane conditions, hunger, and thirst. Their heroic fight to get home will have a much greater impact than just on their own lives. It will influence a future president and change the course of American history in ways that are still felt today. This is the true story of the men who made it, and it's one that you don't want to miss. Subscribe to Against the Odds on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, the Wondery app, or wherever you're listening right now.